Just taking a minute to land, sensing the weight of the body on the cushion on the chair. So, last week I have attended the first Eco Dhamma retreat conference at Spirit Rock. And I came back, Thursday last week. And the working title for this retreat conference was Refuge and Response, Loving Engagement in a Time of Transformation. And it was an incredibly diverse field of about 90 participants, and also very multi-generational and extremely vibrant. And there was music and, people in their early 20s. And the oldest person attending was Jane Fonda, who is 87. So she came in one morning and gave like about a 1-hour conversation. And she is like a long-term activist, and she was very to the point. And she always said, I forgot your question. But then she spoke kind of quite free flow. And then the next question she would speak. And then I totally forgot your question. But what she said was really very connected. She was very inspiring. 87 years old and still going strong. And she was just talking about she is an activist since, I think, 50 years or so, and has been in prison, has been really threatened. She says particularly by the administration around President Nixon. So she has really stuck it out. So that was very inspiring to have her. But also, there was a panel. Indigenous panel, and then there was a Black farmers panel and a young people panel, and amazing. And there was a Maori woman who teaches Maori culture to anybody who would like to learn from it. And she was she was teaching us this particular kind of war dance they are doing, where they're making the eyes really huge, and the women have to make their mouth like that, and the men stick out the tongue. And she was teaching us that, and that's a kind of dance, they do in order to prevent war, where they really kind of display how strong they are, and then hoping that people would just pack up and go home because they know they don't stand a chance. So a very skillful technology. So, I came back very enriched, but also quite excited, and a bit ungrounded. And then coming back here into that space, it was like a bit like a postpartum experience, where suddenly there is all of that space and nothing going on much. So now I've made it back, into the middle ground again. And I have Venerable Kunga with me for a month. And that's also a lovely experience to be with another bhikkhuni for more than just a few days. I haven't had that for quite some time, so that's lovely to be able to share my space. And when I was at this retreat conference, I was invited to to introduce the seed idea of an earth sanctuary as part of contemporary meditation centers. And produce a little handout, which I will send out with my upcoming newsletter on Monday if you're interested to see that. And You know, as you all know, the main reason behind the Earth Room, because the space where I'm sitting right now, or an Earth Sanctuary, which would be a little bit of a bigger version of than the Earth Room, is to support practitioners to feel deeply held by the Earth and also by community in order to open up and attune to the instructions, you know, which comes to us from the Earth, the information, you know, which comes through from the ground up into the formation of our bodies and changes us on that neural pathway level, you know, which are all through our bodies, culturally conditioned over many, many generations. So having, a ritual space as a skillful means to amplify this possibility of being instructed as part or as a cell within a huge, vast organism which we call planet Earth, and we are part of it. And we can consciously open up to be informed, you know, intentionally, to cultivate the heart and the mind to hold this intention, but also to relate to our bodies as organs of listening or as extensions of the planet, to just look at the whole human experience in a different way than what the current paradigm, you know, teaches us, which is starting to show more and more cracks, because it is no longer up to the job of holding life as it appears at this point in history. So the Earth Sanctuary is enabling infrastructure that can help us to contain what needs to be understood and to repeat that and metabolize it, transform it, and release what needs to be released. Integrate. And I think, you know, those ritual spaces, our forebears have used these ritual spaces and ceremony in order to facilitate huge challenges, because they knew, you know, that these ritual spaces and the ceremonies, they can enhance the resonance and the attunement and, you know, quicken the process, you know, speed it up and, you know, respond in a way which on an individual level is impossible to do. But as we come together, and if we have a containment field which is intentionally created, it can have a great supportive effect on the whole experience. Because without holding this materially collectively, we will, you know, go into fear and then project it and go into polarization, most likely, you know, need to blame somebody for it. And, you know, we're already seeing those things happening on a very worrisome level, particularly here in the US, you know, with an administration which really builds on polarization. And, you know, I myself come from Austria, you know, where we had that also very big, you know, with it was called the Second Reich, the administration around Hitler, who was Austrian, you know, who has really driven polarization to a particular extreme. And what we see in Gaza also. You know, this is always how people very unskillfully project their fear out onto someone else. Yes, and, you know, if we don't have skillful means to help us channel that, then, you know, polarization is just a very convenient avenue to get rid of the pressure and put it on somebody else. Or, you know, we get really very depressed and our vitality gets more and more diminished because we are so full of fear, we just don't want to feel. Because, in difficult bottleneck times like this, the psyche needs to run through certain processes in a communal holding space in order to be able to digest the magnitude, of what is at stake. It's not less, than the extinction of our species, really. So it's a serious issue. We can choose to relate to it in a skillful way, not with the intention to rescue or to save the planet, because it's impossible for an individual to do, but to kind of participate more fully, and not going down these paths of distractions and distraction and going unconscious, really. Because if something as big as that, is at stake, then it does need a full surrendering to the process and an offering of one's life energy. And that can really be supported through a visual display of symbols, for example, where we make what's going on internally, make it external through symbolism and art. And Carl Gustav Jung said the psychological mechanism for the transformation of energy is the symbol. The psychological mechanism for the transformation of energy is the symbol. And I just see, that Oliver wrote into the chat, what tangibly can we do to help? This everyone has to find out for themselves by attuning, to the field with that same question, which you just posed. What can I do from where I am and from the skills I have, the talents I bring? What can I do? And the answer will come through as we are, continue to engage in the question. We will become the answer. And for that, we have to be willing to feel and digest all of what is, blocking our vitality and blocking our connection with knowing, what our contribution can be. Nobody else can tell us that, but we can, maybe sometimes be inspired by what somebody else is doing, and they might need support, and then we can choose to support them financially or with our presence or whatever. But it is an engagement, an engaged surrender, really. And that's how I started, when I became aware of the whole, situation around, after I became a bhikkhuni, it was really clear to me that I wanted to engage. And so around 2012, I started more formally to engage, and I didn't know what to do, but I just started with small things and seeing what other people did, and so on. And now it's about 13 years later, I sit here in the Aloka Earth Room, and I've just been, invited to introduce this idea at a conference. And there's a little, kind of possibility, maybe I can bring this to a meditation center. Maybe I can bring this idea even to Spirit Rock, which is just 8 miles down the line from here. So in the beginning, I had no clue at all, but I did know what my skills were. To a certain extent, I knew, And then I was just going in this inquiry and working through all of the doubts and the fears and the confusion and the joy and the exhilaration and the excitement and everything up and down, up and down. And I didn't give up, but I surrounded myself with support, and then the Earth Room actually became visible, because I needed something, like I needed a huge reminder. And my reminder has become so big that I can sit inside of it, now, and other people can sit there with me. And then I just thought, oh, maybe I should invite other people in. And then they came and then they liked it, and here it is. I became the answer to my question because I was consistently asking it. And when I was scared or when I was, wanted to give up and felt depressed or whatever, I would get help, either from people or from the more than human world. And I have a plant ally out here in my yard. I can go and sit and ask questions if I need to. And I have, I have shrines, different shrines, and I have different routine of prayers I do in the morning, to ask for inspiration and support. So I'm not doing this alone. Even sometimes I do feel alone, But then I just go into the space and I remember that's not true. This is just, an idea. So it's a lot of work, it's a lot of inner work, but I feel inspired to do it. And, some days I don't feel inspired. I can take a break also sometimes, and maybe eat ice cream or do something, which is a little bit soothing, or, and then it is impermanent, and then the energy comes back, So, but this approach, to use symbol, to use external reminders as a way to energize the system, that gives access to deeper layers of reality which otherwise are not accessible. And this is, where we can see, for example, in those ancient caves, ancient cave paintings, which our forebears used mainly, to go on the hunt, which was a very scary thing, when you had we had to go really close to the animals in order to, have the food they needed in order to survive. So there was a lot of ritual around the hunt, not only, the danger of the hunt itself, but also what would happen with the spirit, after the animals were killed and eaten. They wanted to pacify that as well. So there were several dangers they needed to get a handle on. And that's what we can see in these magnificent cave paintings, which are the very beginning of using symbolism, using art for managing what's happening internally on an external level. And then I've heard, I don't know to what degree this is really true, but there was a time, I think there was a change in the, I'm not exactly sure, some change, on a planetary level where there was a lot of displays going on in the heavens, a lot of different like lights and so on, and early humans, were very afraid of that. And then they say, that at that time, cave paintings really were like exploding all around the planet, because that was a way, it brought that forth, that the great fear, the great pressure brought forth this coping mechanism, which we call art today. It's a coping mechanism, it's a way of amplifying our capacity to transform from one way of looking to another way of looking. And now, the evolutionary pressure of the climate crisis or the poly crisis even, is also such a moment, where we are really under great pressure if we don't, don't, what's the word, if we don't look away, if we really let that pressure meet us, it will bring forth a response. Because this is how evolution works, something breaks down and then the pressure gets so big, we call it a bottleneck, and then it pushes out something which was not accessible, which was lying dormant. And that's what we need to facilitate, for our own species. Because there is dormant potential is sleeping, it needs to wake up. And also some of our potential has been forgotten and it needs to come back online again. And symbolism, gives the heart mind a kind of security and foundation to rest on. And in that way, we can use conventional tendencies as gateways for transformation, such as our ordinary need, for security, inspiration, and beauty, to use that as a jumping board for opening up something which is already there, but which hasn't yet been engaged, or maybe just been engaged by some experts, like shamans or other beings, who have the capacity to connect to that within themselves, and then they can open up the path, and then others can follow it. And and usually, when we get close to such a particular atmosphere, then the resulting resonance quickens the whole psychic field, and intuition knows. And I've experienced that definitely, in some very powerful temples or gompas, or sometimes in nature, or sometimes, when we are in community going through something, or when I was still, working in avant-garde dance theater, where we were, working together as an ensemble, and it was all very, spontaneous, and where sometimes, amazing atmosphere was created, and which then, the audience would also really, come along, and then, something opens up, and then we can see something, then we can see possibilities we wouldn't be able to see if the mind isn't inspired in this way. And, that's a potential possibility what a ritual space like an earth sanctuary could offer, that we can, intuitively reconnect with something we don't remember on a conscious level, but we remember it in our being, on a felt level, not with words. And then if we feel it, we can also imagine it. And then we can also use imagination to sense more deeply. And I think I've mentioned that in the past, that what is used a lot in the Vajrayana with those different visualization techniques, which is a way of imagining and then, sensing into that field of imagination of a Buddha field, for example, or, being empowered by a deity. And if we visualize it, and if we might be able to see it on a tanka, for example, then we can also sense it. And this same technique, can be used in different ways. It doesn't need to be a Tibetan deity or something. It can be, for example, the earth as a guru. And that's something I feel really interested in, that potential, to use these ancient forms of working with the mind, and bringing them into what's important right now. As ways to disrupt the current destructive trajectory, because it needs to be disrupted, you know, outside but also inside, because we can't think our way out of it. But we have to open up new space, you know, so that this information can land in us. It's coming from the ground up, you know, through the body. And, you know, as I've said also quite a few times, our indigenous brothers and sisters, they have, or some of them, they have been able to preserve that way of communicating, you know, through ceremony and through a very different conditioning. It has never been lost, that sense of deep embeddedness and gratitude and dependence on the biosphere as the ground of our being here, our physical being here. So it always comes back to the same thing, you know, we need to see ourselves differently than from what the current paradigm tells us. You know, that we are separate, that we have special rights here on this planet more than any other species, that we are exceptional, and we need to come off that worldview urgently. So let's use the remaining 30 minutes for another meditation together. And please, you know, find a posture you can sustain for that time. And just, you know, noticing what you are bringing here today, how you are. And, you know, and sitting here with the intention to be informed by the earth about what we can contribute. Because we are already, you know, selves within this vast body of the earth. And we can just get used to that. You know, coming back and back again to the fact, you know, that we are inside the earth, not on top of it. You know, like little earthworms, that's the name of the practice we are doing, earthworm practice. And really trusting that by shifting the perception, that it will open up new ways. Because intention is extremely powerful. And it's a lot of, you know, it's a series of micro adjustments which needs to be repeated again and again. So it's not very flamboyant in that sense. It's not like a big statement and then it's all gonna be clear. It's like learning a different language or learning to play an instrument. You need to do it again and again and again, and sometimes it might be boring and sometimes we don't feel like it, but we need to do it. Because it's that you know, that disinterest is part of the conditioning. And it needs to be met with a lot of you know, gentleness, but also firmness. We're not gonna get lost in that. And you know, those skills, they need to be trained. So adjusting, to the gravitational embrace of the earth, sensing that, how we are pulled to the center of the earth and kept in place. And feeling the blood pulsing in your fingertips, in your neck. And knowing that the liquid which pulses, through your body is actually part of the larger water and mineral cycle of your watershed, the region where you live. So where do you begin and where do you end? There's no saying. And it's just, that remembering, that's what kind of slowly, wears away the old ways of thinking. Just like any good practice, it needs to be repeated. And the kind of, how do we say that, the stretch, of inhabiting a new paradigm, a new way of looking, needs to be felt and sensed and allowed, because this is how transformation feels like. It's a bit disconcerting sometimes, it makes you feel a little bit uncertain. And that's why so many people don't want it. Because there is the assumption there's something wrong with this. But it is like this. It's like, learning to walk with a new pair of shoes. It's a bit stressful, even if not painful sometimes. But at one point it's done. But if you don't start, it's never done. So the liquid which runs through the body runs through the ground of the watershed where you live, and then comes down as the rain. And the breathing process, the oxygen which we breathe in is a byproduct of photosynthesis of the plankton in the ocean and the green plant life around us. Again, where do we begin and where do we end? There's no saying. As we are, intentionally reflecting in that way, we get rewired. And to just invite that, by creating the space, by relaxing into it and, breathing into it and inviting it. And, and maybe meeting that, the sensations of it as an aliveness, which is spreading out throughout the body and making new pathways, neural pathways, which is sometimes an unpleasant or a little bit pressured experience. And being okay with that. But just simply coming back to, the very simple instructions of first establishment of mindfulness, body, present moment, body, and then, second establishment of mindfulness, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, feeling tone, and then mind state, third establishment of mindfulness, feeling maybe a bit of aversion is there, or a bit of doubt is there. Whatever it is, we can know it. We don't need to become it. So using this very pragmatic template, for Buddhist meditation as a support to go through the rewiring and inviting it with curiosity, fourth establishment of mindfulness, curiosity, being one of the factors of awakening. And sensing into the aliveness, the vibrancy, which comes to us from all the food and the beverages we drink directly, from the body of the earth, and the oxygen we breathe from the body of the earth. And that is happening since a very long time, but we are looking at it in a way which is new, because the earth demands that from us, and if we don't respond, we just simply become irrelevant, which is also a possibility, but I'm just gonna try first to respond before I give up. I rather give in than up. Just feeling this aliveness, this energy, which might become a little bit more accessible as your breathing has deepened. And just, noticing your muscle tone. And, that the source of this energy is the sun, which rains down photons on the earth and, gets all of this growth going, the food growing, the different beings eating the food and growing, and then these beings eating each other and growing, but at the base of it is the sun, the energy of the sun, which often in indigenous cultures is depicted as the father, and the earth being the mother. which brings forth, through the impulse of the Father, brings forth these life forms, gives birth to all of these life forms. This rapport, which is at the base and then there's other celestial bodies who also influence what's going on the moon, and there's the stars. And with every heartbeat, this sun energy is released. We can feel it. The heart, is pumping it throughout the body. So participating in that aliveness, and knowing, that everything comes from that vast, cosmic field. And we can open ourselves to participate in it with interest, with curiosity, with attunement, like an offering we can make. And then see, what happens, what is called forth through us. We either support someone else or find our own expression or a mixture of both. Then over time, if we continue to ask the question, we live into the answer. An answer which doesn't come through thinking about it. But the thinking is just a support, but it's not the source of an answer. The answer arrives in a different way. And then when we look back, we can see that with much more clarity. Looking at our path, and that's in that way, we can really develop a dynamic dialogue with that which keeps us alive. In a more immature relationship, we would call that like a big, the Father God sitting on the cloud with a long beard, taking care of us, or rescuing us. And that one, we all of us don't really buy into it anymore. So we develop a more sensing relationship to this life force. By, welcoming the grief and the confusion and the doubt. As an entry point to the process. Knowing, that if we engage with that, it will make us porous enough so we can receive the instructions. But if we are walling that off, then we are just like sitting inside a box and feel totally disconnected. So being willing, to go to the cracks of the dying paradigm in order to accelerate the emergence of our, and being held by our instinctive loyalty to this place we call planet Earth, because we are part of it. We are called human, which means earthling, or of the earth, because we are simply that. And what I have really seen through my own practice, doing this now since, whatever, like 13, 14 years more consciously, that what the earth requires will need to make itself felt within us as if it were our most private desire. And then your life and your practice becomes one, gets so intertwined that there's no more difference. And that's, what usually a monastic form supports, that the day job and the other job is one job, And then, of course, if you live in that form long enough, it also turns out to be not as ideal as we thought it would be, but it is still a good option. In particular, if we have the capacity to see it evolving together with everything else, having a root in the ancient past, but keep on growing and staying connected. By asking that question, what does this aliveness need from me right now? And then keeping it open and seeing what happens, what is called forth. And being okay to be confused and be afraid sometimes, and using the Buddha's teaching to handle that, Staying on track. So I leave you to it for the last few minutes, about 6-7 minutes. Just, connect with that urge to evolve and allowing it to inform you on this wordless level.